Right, so we are going to talk about the plans for our new fund, which we are very excited to share here with you guys today. Mario, you can go on the next slide. Perfect. So the first thing I want to mention here is Polkadot ecosystem has a lot of capital already in the form of treasury and grants, right? As we all know, the Polkadot treasury is huge. There is a lot of capital available, and there are different ways that it's getting deployed. There's also a lot of controversy around the way it's getting deployed, but that's like a topic for a different talk. But it exists, right? VC money, on the other hand, is unfortunately still pretty scarce. I've been talking quite a lot to some of my other VC friends in Hong Kong and in other parts of the world. And oftentimes when they look at a project, they're like, oh, you've got a good team, you've got a good idea, good branding, but why are you building on Polkadot, right? So Polkadot is not like the sexiest technology in town at the moment, even amongst the, so to speak, sophisticated investors such as VC funds. That's unfortunate, and that's like a narrative that we want to change. We think Polkadot should be the place that people go to for the tech, and also because that's where they find funding that they need to build their products. The other aspect that I want to mention here at the beginning is ecosystem fund versus direct investment. So some people say, okay, why do we need an ecosystem fund? Anyone who's got like an interest in Polkadot-based projects can just simply deploy or invest directly in the individual projects that are building on top of Polkadot. And while that is of course correct, anyone can do that, in reality it does not happen as much as we would like to see. And especially the types of investors that we are targeting, namely family offices, are probably not going to spend all the time and effort to do the due diligence at all the many things that are happening in the Polkadot ecosystem before deciding to invest. So for them, it's much easier to, with one single click, if you want, invest in an entire ecosystem. All right, that's kind of the premise for this entire presentation. Now I hand it over to Mario for a quick intro of who we are.
Hello, also from my side. Very happy to be back at Decoded. So for those who don't know us yet, so we are Harbour Industrial Capital. We founded in late 21 and then launched our first fund in January 2022. Our AUM is over 15 million. It's 10 million here, but it's 50 million from 50 LPs. So we anchored the fund ourselves initially. We were very convicted and invested in the ecosystem early on. And then more and more friends initially asked us to join. So we set up the fund. And as we got our track record, so we are over 2x now, we also got more and more institutional players. Institutional players, as Max mentioned, meaning mainly family offices. Like in Hong Kong, we have 3 of the top 10 families invested with us, some Japanese, so very Asia-heavy focus, but also some Middle East and probably 1/3 from Europe, since we're both from Austria originally, but spent a lot of time in Asia. Max 10 years in Hong Kong, and before that 5 years in Shanghai. Myself 14 years in Hong Kong. So Max was with Morgan Stanley before, working there, and myself at Bank of China. So he was more on the research side of things, so very heavy focus on due diligence and investments. Myself more on the capital market side, so I helped Bank of China to build up the capital markets business, was heading the non-China capital markets business. And with our fund, I think I would like to highlight that we already invested in over 20 projects. So we helped more than 20 projects to get the Parachain slot, and then later also helped them to get the listing and market makers and so on. Some of them we got heavily involved in. Some of them are here today. So very happy to support the ecosystem through our fund. And I think what is really also to mention is our background is that we plan to bridge traditional investors with Web3, because 80% plus of our investors are non-crypto native. And usually they say, oh, crypto, oh, so like a payment token. I think it's all of you have come through similar conversations. So you need to present it in an easy, digestible way, and from a traditional investor's perspective. And we think we did a good job doing that. That's why we're proposing also the new fund, also primarily sourced from traditional investor sources.
All right. Now, deploying a $100 million fund is going to be one thing. But before we can talk about deployment and before we can talk about all of the projects out there that are looking for funding from us, which probably is why you are all here, we first have to talk about raising the fund, right? A $100 million fund is not going to raise itself, right? And so maybe some of you go like, oh, how realistic is that? Do these guys really have the, are they really able to pull this off? Are they going to raise $100 million? Now, we think we will, and I want to walk you guys through our fundraising strategy, because that's currently where we're at. To raise a $100 million fund, we will have to tap into multiple sources of capital, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So let me run you guys through it, so that you have kind of a bit of an idea here. General partners, that's us. So I think this is really important to say that we're going to have skin in the game ourselves, right? For Fund 1, we put $1 million of the 10 million in ourselves, so roughly 10% GP commitment, which I always like to emphasize as the first thing, because if you don't have skin in the game, then what are you doing, right? We know some other funds that, I don't know, have been raising a $100 million fund, right, and put like 0.1% of their own money at stake. This, in my opinion, is not particularly credible, not particularly, I wouldn't trust that, right? Like you want to see the GPs having skin in the game. So right from the beginning, we always say, well, we put some capital, some significant anchoring ourselves. On the anchoring, we hope to have some exciting announcements soon, but for the time being, I'm going to remain quiet on that part. On the strategic investors, so this I think is very important, right? Because what we want to do is like get people or companies or projects who are doing interesting stuff in the crypto world anyways, we want to get them exposed to Polkadot. So I'm, for example, thinking about exchanges, right? Typically crypto exchanges. They usually always have an investment arm as well. Market makers, same thing. We know many of them. They usually, if they're good at what they do, they made some money, they have a prop fund, their founders have a prop fund, and when we can get them as LPs in our VC fund, then their interests are aligned, right? And we can do a lot of like cross, like sort of supporting each other's services. So for example, let's say a market maker is coming into our fund, right? As an LP, we can introduce all the exciting Polkadot-based projects to them that they can market make for. Same thing with exchanges. Polkadot-based projects will find it, like who get investments from our fund, will also find it easier to list on those exchanges. So there's a lot of like this kind of mutual benefit, and this is kind of the way these kind of people are thinking about it. So that's why I call them strategic investors. Other VCs and fund of funds is also a really interesting one. As you guys probably realize, there aren't that many like Polkadot-only funds out there. I mean, arguably there is Sidetail and us. Other VC funds that maybe have like a certain interest in Polkadot, do a bit of Polkadot, but they consider themselves chain agnostic. So with these kind of guys, they tend to, not know much about the Polkadot ecosystem. And our pitch to them is, come into our fund as an LP, and then in exchange, you get all the financial upside, which is great already, but at the same time, you're gonna get all the deal flow, right? Because that's one big bottleneck that I have seen in the past, right? Other non-Polkadot native funds don't understand the ecosystem well enough. They don't have the deal flow. They're not aware of all the cool things that are getting built here. They're also not coming to Decoded, unfortunately, right? I'm trying to invite more like non-Polkadot native funds to come to Polkadot Decoded. However, it's difficult. Once they're an LP and they get all the deal flow, I think they can also do a lot of co-investments alongside us on the same terms as our own fund. Rollover from existing LPs is going to be extremely important because we have our Fund 1. People are happy with the performance, so we can expect that a pretty significant share of Fund 1 is going to roll over into Fund 2, which is going to cover a pretty nice share of the $100 million target as well. Second last point is this ETN that we're currently planning. So this is planning stage at the moment, but we have been speaking with service providers who can facilitate that. The amazing thing about that is that this way we could market our fund to retail, through a brokerage, so through a regular brokerage account within the EU, like, I don't know, interactive brokers. You click buy and you get access to our ecosystem fund, right? You're not just buying DOT, but you're buying the entire portfolio of projects that are inside our fund, which are all within the Polkadot ecosystem. And the last point is the one for which I'm going to switch to the next slide, which is the family offices, because that is where I think the lion's share of the capital will be coming from. Now, why family offices? The current stage that we're currently in, when we want to raise a significant new fund, is that institutional investors, such as pension funds and maybe university endowments, are not quite ready for this yet. I think if I go and try to pitch it there, it's going to be hard, right? On the other side of the spectrum, you have retail. Retail is already investing. If they like, small tickets, $100, $1,000, fine. They can do it, but they can do it directly. So that kind of leaves this middle ground of family offices. So these are wealthy families, usually with a net worth of $50 million plus. And there are a lot of these kind of investor events, these family office summits, where we're planning to go to directly pitch Polkadot, right? As kind of the leader in Web3. I always find it easier to go there to people who are not that familiar with the Web3 space and tell them about all the exciting things that are going on there than going to a Solana conference and trying to convert a Solana Maxi into Polkadot. That's, in my opinion, much more difficult. So yeah, this is going to be, in a nutshell, the different types of funding sources that we're looking on.
Perhaps to add on,
over to you.
Yeah, perhaps to add on the family offices that we already had the test case in Vienna. You can see here the CE Wealth Summit on the right side. So 2 weeks ago, we organized a sponsorship from Polkadot, and then we had a panel 1 hour, and then we had the two of us. You had Christoph from Sciatail, you had Tommy and Natalie from Web3 Foundation, and then for 1 hour we basically worked the room to tell them more about Web3, but it's particularly from a Polkadot perspective. And the feedback was actually overwhelming. And we asked the audience, and around 40% of people already invested in Polkadot, not in Polkadot, in crypto. So definitely there is a strong base of potential investors, and we think this would be a great platform to raise the capital from. But to talk a bit more about our new fund, you all heard this morning on Fabi's speech, on the ecosystem fund. So it was already announced, the first one, and I think ours will be the second ecosystem fund. As Max mentioned, Sciatail and us working together very closely. And what we really propose is, on one hand, the closed-end fund, and here the open-end fund, as you can see. Why do we put up this structure? Well, simply, if you have a VC fund and we go out and we want to work with all of you, all the projects to support you, then Usually you sign a SAFT, so like an agreement for future token, or a SAFE if you don't plan to issue a token in the future. Launchpad, so what comes to mind, of course, is Polymac. That's something that we look forward to working with, and also strategic rounds. But what happens is, on this type of financing, you have like a longer lockup, and because you want to support the projects in the long run, and we see ourselves long-term supporter of these projects. But just having these tokens sitting there doesn't do anything good to the project itself and to the ecosystem. So that's why we also have this liquid fund in the same SPC structure, segregated portfolios with ring-fenced risk, but we can basically utilize tokens that we hold in closed-end fund and activate them in staking pools, set up collators, and very importantly, liquidity provision. Because I think every one of you knows that liquidity on Polkadot is not great yet, but we will make it great. And we don't think it takes actually that much liquidity pools to create a decent marketplace. So I think this is a very important synergy here between the closed end and the open-ended fund. And in addition, as Max already mentioned, the liquid fund we plan to list on a major stock exchange, very likely Vienna. Why Vienna? Not because we're Austrians, but that's a nice fact as well. But also because it's OECD, which is a major requirement for investors. And secondly, it's MiCA regulated. So you can sell all within the EU. And as you know, the EU is the toughest one in terms of regulation. So you want to make sure when you sell the product that it works. For Asia, like Singapore, Hong Kong, selling restriction is much easier to comply with. In Hong Kong, you just need to sell to investors with $1 million of investment, for example, then you can easily work around these restrictions. So you will have daily liquidity, listed product with an icing code. So we are very close to some of the private banks, like Nomura or LGT and the likes, and they need a product with an icing code that is regulated. Then when they market it to their clients, they can just easily say, okay, this is the icing code, buy $50,000 of this, buy $20,000 of this. So we think this is a very important bridge for retail, but also for high net worth individuals and potentially family offices to come into the Polkadot ecosystem. Core time brokerage is something that we are elaborating at the moment with Lastic. Lastic is building a brokerage place for core time. So we'll see how this develops, and we will definitely look forward to helping engineer some products, like maybe futures contracts, so that you as a project don't have to worry about cost of core time. You know exactly, like for the next year or two, how many tokens you need to spend to get the core time. And also we can basically accept tokens, so you don't have to worry how to raise capital or use your capital to buy the core time. So I think this is our plan. It's progressing well. So we already have some strategic investors who gave us some good IOIs, so to say, so indications of interest. And once we launch the fund, we look forward to bagging all this and then add on through retail, family offices, and rollovers.
Yeah. Since we have another 5 minutes, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the deployment. So I guess a lot of you guys here are, building on Polkadot, are looking to raise money from our ecosystem fund in the future, which is obviously why you're here, which is great. This is what this is all about. So I want to dive a little bit more into this 4 different types of token VC, Launchpad, Safe, and Strategic. What does that actually mean? I think we haven't really fleshed that out yet. Token VC here, the logic really is early stage seed round investments, right? I think this is where probably the biggest bottleneck is at the moment, that maybe somebody gets like a treasury funding, they get a DF funding, great. What's the next step, right? The first round, like the first outside capital through the door. This is where a lot of founders are struggling, based on my experience, and this is exactly where we're planning to come in, right? So we're very happy to lead rounds moving forward. We're very happy to be the first check from like outside, like pure grants, to be put towards a seed round. And yeah, I think this is really like going to help people to reach the second, the third, the fourth funding round. SAFE, I specifically mentioned that, and I also know there are some people in the audience who are particularly interested in this part, so I mentioned it. SAFEs are something that we're dearly missing in the Polkadot ecosystem, in my opinion, because in the absence of them, projects are kind of forced towards launching their own token, even though their project does not require a token, right? Which is a bit ridiculous. Why would you launch a fundraising token if you don't need it? SAFEs, on the other hand, simple agreements for future equity, right, allow you to raise without a token, and the VC, in that case us, would benefit from the share of the future cash flow that a business generates. So I think this really enables a bunch of new types of business models that we're not really seeing at the moment, because everyone's trying to push their own token, even though they don't need it. And instead, these guys could, for example, use USDC or even DOT as their native currency, their transaction currency, and getting the funding from us, and in exchange for a share of the equity. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in the 3 minutes that I have left here is the strategic investments. And this, I think, is super, super important as well. Now, infrastructure on Polkadot is already pretty good, I think. All the nuts and bolts are by and large in place. So that's something that we are very happy about, because that's what we have funded in many ways through the first fund. The next thing is like all the user growth, adoption kind of thing, right? So yes, you can bootstrap that, but more interesting actually is getting Web 2 companies, or let's call them traditional companies, that already have a large user base, that already have a lot of clients, into Polkadot. And by virtue of doing that, we go from like 0 to 1 million user, 100 million users, right? So we want to get these guys in, right? Yes, we want to have our homegrown champions, but we also want to have the kind of people who already bring a massive user base with them, right? There are many interesting verticals, right? Gaming is one, healthcare is one, entertainment is one, many more. So there are big user bases out there, and we have to get them in. And the way we're thinking about that is coupling it with an investment from our ecosystem fund. So I guess if you want to have a blueprint, it's a little bit what Sidetail did with Mythical Games, right? I think many of you are familiar with this deal. I think it was a good deal for the Polkadot ecosystem, getting them in. But we need many more Sidetails doing many more Mythical deals, right? And that's what we're trying to do here. Important to say is these are still commercial deals, right? So we would only invest if it makes commercial sense. But as an ecosystem fund, we can couple these things together, right? We can say, these guys, they probably have the option to invest in to build on a bunch of different ecosystems, right? Maybe they want to go to Solana, right? Maybe they want to go to, Arbitrum. So this competition is out there. So Polkadot has to be responsive to that and create the sort of coupling an investment into the coupling an investment in this project or into this company with a commitment of them moving over to Polkadot is something that, in my opinion, is dearly missing in order to achieve the growth in users, in wallets, in transactions that we all want to see here. All right, the timer says my time is up. So thank you very much for listening, and talk to me in person.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Max and Mario. I would have a question if you guys want to stay on stage a little bit, but would like to ask the audience first. Are there any specific questions to Max and Mario for the new $100 million fund for Polkadot? Yes, of course. Hope always has questions. Please.
So I was very interested in your definition of the safe and how a lot of what we have today have to have a token to raise funds, right? Is there any plans or thoughts of anything that's currently existing if they were to go, or if you thought it was a good partnership, that they would give up their token and go into the program that way and go on, I guess, to DOT or to...
You mean like ask projects to renounce their own token, like get rid of it?
Yeah, I mean, if there are some that are not needed, right? Like if there's, and there's is a partnership, or, as a lot of the technology evolves within our ecosystem, right? We're gonna be going and going and going. I mean, that's the intent. We have to go with the times, right? So as the innovation happens, if they want to get away from funding through their token and want to go into your fund, right? Have you thought about that? I know it's a bit of a...
It's really a case-by-case thing, right? I mean, I don't think we're going to do like a big token buyback program, so to speak. It's much easier if they haven't launched a token yet, because it depends on the individual case, right? It's a legal question in many ways, and we're not lawyers. We cannot advise them on that.
Good.
But I understand where you're coming from. It's much easier if they haven't launched any token yet, right? They're just like at the starting phase. They're a startup, a brand new startup, and then they want to raise in dollar for equity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I was about to say also, token buyback can be tricky, especially if you look at liquidity of some of the tokens. So you drive up your cost probably too much in buying back. So it makes more sense for new projects to structure from the beginning. And that's also where we can help to advise the projects on how to structure the financing. And now with the shift to core time, you will have a lot of new projects who will not have a token eventually. Because for parachains, it was typically projects who further down the road needed a token or wanted a token anyways. So I think that's the big change here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. You guys have been in the ecosystem for a while now with this new fund dedicated to Polkadot. Of course, you might have the personal insights, what you would like to see on Polkadot. What was something that you have seen already, where you said like, oh man, we would have liked to be involved in this, that we already have on Polkadot, because you can't maybe predict the future, but like we need to say, hey, this is something that we want to also see multiplying or being multiplied within Polkadot.
Look, I mean, for Fund 1, we did a lot of infrastructure, right? Yep. There's this old saying, when there's a gold rush, sell shovels, right? That's a pretty solid, that's a pretty straightforward strategy. So we have invested a lot in infrastructure, in the nuts and bolts, right? Decentralized computation, wallets, exchanges, NFT, marketplaces, KYC, credentials, identity. So all these things are not in themselves not necessarily that sexy, right? Yeah. It's not like someone goes like, oh wow, that's amazing. But these are important things to build the products that then can finally onboard the next billion users. That's Fund 1. For Fund 2, we're changing the strategy a little bit, because we think the infrastructure is by and large already in place. Yeah. And we're more moving to things that can really bring millions, billions of new users, right? Yep. So anything that already has a lot of users, that can potentially attract a lot of users, is something in scope.
Cool, and that's why also core time, focus on core time is very important.
And I think what drove me to Polkadot was really that actual companies are using the technology. Yeah. So yes, other ecosystems might do a better job at like having degens and like a lot of hype. And I think in the short to mid run, we might need a bit more of that on Polkadot. Yep. So that's great to have like mythical, like with gaming, and then you can engage with retail, but also with some of the more crypto community. But in the long run, I think like it takes a nice blend of, gaming can be a part of it, but of these infrastructure projects, cooperations with those like so-called real-world companies that bring on board millions of users.
And we have seen some of these enterprises or presentations already on stage. They're also like we like a social platform to bring these users onto Web3. So let's see next year, Decoded, what kind of new enterprises maybe have joined Polkadot through your new fund. I'm excited about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.